Hello and welcome back to Fuel for Thought, our weekly look at all things energy related and beyond. Scott Squires, pleased to be joined by the energy insider, Dan McTagg. And Dan, as we record this on a Thursday, Newfoundland would have set their prices at the pumps. So before we move into talking about some other things, what can consumers expect in the rest of Atlantic Canada when they go fuel up tomorrow? Are we looking at prices up, prices down, or a mixed bag? What do you got?
Well, Newfoundland and the PUB, marches to a different drummer. I think there's times where I shouldn't be making predictions, let them come out what they do, and then share this small amount with what Canadians know. It should have gone up about a penny. Instead, it went up 0.75 for gasoline. Diesel should have been up about 1.3 cents a liter. Instead, it went up almost 3 cents a liter. So last week we saw them not increase diesel the way they did this week. So I don't understand how they pick and choose what the number is going to be. They might as well just guess it, because that's all they're doing in Newfoundland. And unfortunately, folks are forced to pay for that kind of stuff. I wish their Premier Anthony Furey would just take that stupid system and get rid of it. As for the rest of Atlantic Canada, I would expect a 1 cent increase for gasoline and about 1.3 to 1.4 cent a liter increase for diesel. As you and I talked about last week, this is really the end of the line. We're not going to get these fake numbers anymore that come as a result of the energy traders who are no longer actually physical traders, but in fact paper traders who trade stock options and treat commodities like they're a stock market thing where you buy and hold or buy and sell. What's going to happen, I think, with respects to the election this week is almost guaranteed that come January, the Trump administration is going to re-sanction Iran heavily and severely, as it should, by the way. And that is going to leave the world with a lot less energy. If OPEC stays disciplined, it's going to mean less oil. And of course, Canada, which doesn't have many other pipelines in which to send oil, means that the rest of the world is going to continue to see this increase in demand while the supply is constricted. And by the way, Scott, the United States last week recorded its highest ever demand for fuel ever at 21.7 million barrels a day. Remember, they only produce 13 million barrels and they think they're great. They're still short 7 million barrels, half of which comes from Canada to make up the difference. The reality is that we're looking at a very serious crisis as a result of woke ESG capital traders who are ETFs, money managers, and hedgers dumbing down oil prices because they were worried it might have an effect on the Democrats. Well, it sure as heck did. And now, of course, reality is going to start to strike hard. The United States also has to restore about 300 million barrels of oil that it's foolishly liquidated under the Biden and Harris administration on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Just at a time in which geopolitics means something, these guys decided to trade it away to bring prices down despite the crisis.
Dan, opinions are one thing, and we've all got them, right? But for the most part, data and facts and hard data, provable data, is another, right? Opinion aside, data is data. So when you're talking about last week, the United States using 21 million barrels of oil, seeing their highest usage recorded, that's data. I'm guessing that that can be backed up with numbers. If that's the case, why are there still so many telling me and telling so many who listen that, oh, well, uh, oil is basically at its peak and we're going to see much, much less usage over the next year, 5 years, 20 years. Yeah, it's oil and gas and fossil fuels are dead and buried. If the numbers and the data aren't matching up with the messaging that's coming from some sectors, why is that happening?
Well, we have some organizations like the International Energy Organization, which is really a front for the green movements. They're paid big money. They're run by the United Nations, and they're run by the G20, and of course by our OECD nations who pay them, including Canada, to come out with false information. It's an organization that never gets its data right. My data comes from the Energy Information Agency, the United States Department of Energy. Now, while that's questionable sometimes, it's usually pretty accurate in terms of the demand picture. It's just that we have a market run by kids who frankly don't understand fundamentals and are maybe too busy sipping their lattes over at Starbucks rather than understanding what a commodity really does, what it means. And anybody who thinks this fossil fuel is going to go away, well, I got something to tell you. I got some really bad news. China's using more coal to produce those renewables that you think are so cute and trendy. Not you, but generally speaking, and are going to somehow diminish energy. No, they're going to actually pollute the world a lot more. And I'm not talking about CO2. I'm talking about all the other pollutants that come with coal. We're also talking about people who tend to misestimate or misunderstand or misinterpret the signals coming from third world nations and nations that are trying to get back into our standard of living, they're going to use a lot more fossil fuels to get there. So polymers, plastics, your tires for your cars, what we put on all of our electric vehicles to make sure the wiring is in place, all of the polymers, all of those things have to be made with, you got it, fossil fuels. So many think it's going to go away, you're crazy. What is important though is other nations are able to develop and get their product to market. Think of Guyana here, think of Brazil, and yes, Canada. The problem with one of the three of those nations is that they're not building enough pipelines to get their product to market. So a country like Canada, whose resources have really been the reason why we've been maintaining such a high standard of living, like it or not, it's not your financial sector or your real estate sector or your trendy, service sector. It's the fact that you can actually trade something the world wants, and they want our natural gas and they want our oil before any other country, mostly. But I digress. The reality is that some people live in a world of fantasy. That's now gone out the window. I think what's happened this week in the United States with the election, not just of the president in terms of the electoral college votes, but also the popular vote and Congress itself. I think the days of wokeistry, climate alarmism are quickly coming to an end. I think there's going to be a real dose of reality poured on the heads of everybody out there who's followed this narrative for the past 9 or 10 years. Reality is that we're going to start to see energy prices go up to reflect the fact that there is no alternative, although we've poured trillions of dollars into renewables. We're just not making it. Ask Germany why they're still in a recession. Is a self-made recession because they put all their eggs in one basket, and now even manufacturers from Volkswagen to Audi, which is owned by Volkswagen, and of course BMW and Mercedes, planning to get the heck out. Manufacturing is dropping in places like Germany because they went woke under their energy banned policies of 10, 15 years ago. These things don't work, and for that reason, they don't work for consumers. It's also why Canadians are going to get a dose of reality in a very short period of time, especially given the federal Liberal government's attack on Canada's energy sector, which in turn is going to all bite us in the backside with a 2% drop in our GDP and hundreds of thousands of jobs lost if they were managed to get that through. There's a lot of talk about there, Scott, but it's all connected to a green narrative that has taken us down a very dangerous and very destructive economic path.
And to expand on that, big news this week that was really dominating my social media feeds was the announcement earlier this week about the emissions cap, looking to cut emissions by 35% in the oil and gas sector by 2030. And there's been a lot of reaction from both sides, those who support it and those who definitely don't, including Alberta. Dan, for those like myself that are lay people and don't know all of the ins and outs of what this means, what's your take on this announcement about this emissions cap and what it could mean?
Well, it's a recipe for disaster. Hey, Canadians, wake up. Do you actually think that the standard of living that you have now seen compromised is going to get better by such a ridiculous and stupid announcement? No producing nation in the world that produces natural gas and oil is prepared to subject itself to the fact that up to 2019, we actually dropped emissions. Now they want to get 35% below. With what technology? You have policy out there that is completely bereft of any understanding of reality. And if people think it's cool and trendy, as I said, sipping their little lattes and sitting back and trying to pretend that, that we can get rid of all this stuff, give your ignorant head a shake. This country cannot survive without oil and gas. This country, economically and realistically, nothing will work in a cold country like Canada with an attempt to try to say technology somehow exists where we can remove these emissions. And what does it do? It's 1.5% of 0.03%, 0.4% of the world's entire carbon. Listen, there was a major, volcanic eruption in 2022, Hunga Tonga in the Pacific, that put more emissions in the air and vapor in the air to create, uncertainty and some concern about the climate than anything that man could have done. But for Canada to punish itself, I have to say, with people like Stephen Guilbeault, an alarmist, a guy who's been charged with scaling, the CN Tower here in my neck of the woods, a guy who went out to Premier Alberta, Ralph Klein's house and terrorized his wife by, putting banners on top of their home. This is madness. This is insanity from a socialist and a Malthusian, and he's an admitted one. He says he's a socialist, he's a Marxist, and he wants to somehow control population. And this man, individual Stephen Guilbeault, should explain how the heck he's been able to make some money with his Cycle Capital and many other groups while he's a minister profiting from this kind of stuff. In any other country, these people will be up on charges, but we're going to have to wait for another election for Canadians to recognize that the people who are pushing this do not have Canada's best interests at heart. More importantly, they lied. They absolutely lied. Surprise, surprise. And some saying, well, politicians lie all the time. Well, in this case, they refused to provide what's called a cost-benefit analysis. I found this garbage out a few years ago with the clean fuel standard. The second carbon tax with Atlantic Canada is paying about 8 cents a liter for now. For every dollar of benefit, so-called benefit, reduction or emissions, whatever the case may be, it costs you 6 times more in terms of what implementation will do. So, the federal government is hiding. It knows the numbers are bad. It knows we're going to have net loss of jobs if they proceed with emissions cap. And what concerns me, Scott, is that Canadians are sitting by, oh, I don't care. Yeah, I'll wait for my welfare check. I mean, look, it's good to have those checks. But if you are waiting for pensions, hospital care, social care, or equalization like Quebec, and where Mr. Guilbeault and Trudeau come from, well, what happens when we lose 20% of our production and 20% of our income and 20% of the 25 to 30 net billion dollars this industry provides for our social programs in this country? Is Quebec ready to take a $3 billion cut in its equalization program? I don't think so. And that's going to affect Atlantic Canadians too. So look, people may not like what I have to say, but them's the facts, them's the reality of what we're talking about here. When you dump and destroy your most lucrative, most important industry, as we are seeing wantonly done by a handful of Montreal, Quebec politicians, and by the way, I'm français, I have no skin in the game. When you have people making these kind of pronouncements, they know full well it's a vindictive move aimed to hurt the oil and gas sector, but it's also aimed to exclusively to hurt Saskatchewan, Alberta especially, and of course parts of BC. And of course, we can even throw Newfoundland in there. Newfoundland, I mean, a province with a $20 billion debt, has more oil and gas off its shores than Norway, which has a $2 trillion surplus through its sovereign funds that's had since 1990. Folks, wake up, please. I mean, Scott, this is the message I have to give to Canadians. Stop falling for the Pied Pipers who are trying to pretend that somehow we can do emissions, do damage to our economy to somehow change the weather. If you believe that, I got a great deal on last year's winter snow for you.
Dan, supporters of this announcement about an emissions cap, their talking point the last couple of days has been, well, wait a minute, this is a cap on emissions, not a cap on production. Alberta and all these other oil producing provinces and areas can produce all they want. This has nothing to do with production. It's about emissions. What's your reply to that talking point?
That's dishonesty. If you say someone they have to meet these emission drops by 35% by 2030, but below 2019, and you can't meet them, you have a choice. You stop production or you buy tons of credits. Either way, it's going to send the price of the commodity to the roof, and no one internationally, much less domestically, is going to buy it. So it's a little stupid. It's like saying, hey, go run an extra 100 meters, but hold your breath. How many people can do that? As I said, Canadians really have to give their head a shake, because we know that the Liberals and their friends in the NDP are lying through their teeth. I'm saying that as a Liberal member of 18 years in the House of Commons. This deception has got to come to an end, Scott, and it has to come to an end very soon, because we know Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister of Energy, was lying through his teeth when he said this will create more jobs for Canadians. What it's going to do is diminish the purchase power of every Canadian. The Canadian dollar probably worth $1.60 to buy $1 US. That's going to add about another 30 cents to the price of gasoline, diesel, heating oil, propane, natural gas, or whatever widget you create in this country. Any kind of commodity is going to see its price depressed, at least price increase, and the ability for Canadians to pay for it lost. So when you hear a talking point like that, talk to experts who know what they're talking about. Oh, by the way, I was the Liberal energy guy for many, many years for the Liberal Party and consumer affairs guy. So as a former Liberal, I've never joined any other party. I can tell you they're full of hops. Do not believe the mendacity that is coming out of their mouths, because they don't understand a thing about what they're doing. I've proven it with the clean fuel standard, which you in Atlantic Canada are starting to have to pay. And I'm going to say it once again, because not just Dan McTeague, Deloitte wrote a report this summer saying the exact same thing. So everything I'm saying here, are Canadians willing to take more punishment just so they can be cute and trendy? And, that's something to talk about as they can't afford the next cup of coffee, because that's where we're heading. And that's where these guys want to take us, because they're upset. They're 22% in the polls. They're toast the moment the election's called. They know that. So they're going to do as much damage as they can. It's vindictive. It's scorched earth. And it's time for Canadians, especially Atlantic Canada, to join with other Canadians and punt them right through the end zone. Get rid of them. These people are bad for the economy, and they're bad for our future, and they're bad for our children's future.
And something else I've picked up on, certainly this week with the announcement about the emissions cap, I've seen some, again, supporters of it, saying things such as, well, Polyev is against this and he's going to argue against it because he's lining his pockets with money from the oil and gas industry. I've seen people make that same accusation of you. Why is it so easy, Dan, for folks to just simply say, oh, well, the only reason you don't agree with it is because you're on the side of oil and gas and you're on the side of, big O&G, and well, you're getting financed by them. Again, I saw accusations of that Mr. Polyev is lining his pockets with oil and gas money. I've seen people say it of you. What's your retort to that?
Well, look, I'm not a big fan of Mr. Polyev, and I'm not a conservative. But anybody's going to make that kind of argument. It's a distraction, isn't it? Because what we've seen here in Canada, and you can't deny it, look at the number of people who are living in tents now. Look at the number of people having to go to food banks. Look at the value of the Canadian dollar. Look at the fact that we have now national debts that are and deficits that are approaching $50 billion a year. This is untenable. And if you think you got time to fall into their little distractions about who's being paid by whom, I would simply say to you, those climate groups that are out there making billions of dollars, foundations and charities that get no scrutiny, are not subject to any kind of audits as they used to be in the past, because Trudeau removed the audits, including for his own foundation, the Trudeau Foundation. When you come to think about it, the only organizations I see putting that kind of argument out, other than liberals who are desperate and know they're going to lose the next election, are climate organizations. I'll give you an example. The Canadian Climate Institute raises almost $0. We got $52 million from you as a taxpayer. That kind of sham, you can say anything you want about where people are getting the money, but when you have to go to the taxpayers to rob them silly and then tell them, here's the money, so we're going to go around and buttress whatever the nonsense and lies the federal government is putting about, and then really, polish the apple of those who are paying you, you have to kind of wonder if we got our priorities wrong. We have a national debt in this country that's approaching $1.3 trillion. Our economy is only $2 trillion a year. If you can afford to have an economy that's saddled with so much debt while our standard of living continues to fall, then you are either bought, and I say that to people who make those comments, or you're stupid and ignorant. And that's a very harsh thing to say, but I got to say to people who make those kind of comments, when it's put up against scrutiny of any type of analysis, it falls to pieces, and they know it. So the question isn't, where does Mr. Polyev get his money? Because I think it's pretty clear there's a lot of Canadians who have a bit of money who are prepared to put their money where their mouth is and get rid of this horrendous, corrupt, liberal government, and a government that's taking us down this very dangerous path. I think the question should be asked, who's paying you to come up with those talking points? Because those talking points are as stunned as anything I've ever seen in my 30, 40 years in this business of being at the center of public policy.
Dan, we've referenced elections quite a bit, not only today, but in past episodes. We know that there's a federal election less than a year away, maybe sooner, but it may go until next fall. And I want to ask you about polling. And the reason I want to ask you about polling is there's been a lot of discussion the last couple of days in the United States about polling and really how, for the most part, wrong it was. There was no polling really that showed what was going to happen with the presidential side of things, with Trump getting such a huge popular vote margin and winning the Electoral College like he did. And I ask you about that because if the polling could have been so off in the United States, and they're talking about it now a couple of days later, what do you make of polling in Canada, and how much weight should we put in it when for a long time now polling has been showing, for the most part, the Conservatives and Mr. Polyev having a comfortable lead and looking like they will sweep into a majority? Do you feel that there may be an opportunity there for Liberals and others to say, polling was way off in the United States, forget the polling here, just go and vote? Your thoughts?
From experience, pollsters are bought. A lot of them are. And it depends who pays them and what kind of question they're asking. That'll give you the answer you want. I think the better poll is the one that we just saw in the United States, but we see in Canada. The only poll that matters is the one on election day. And a lot of Liberals are hanging their hat on that. But I have a feeling in all my years, going back to 1974, but truly from 1978 on, active in the Liberal Party, this party isn't just going to be annihilated in the next election. It's going to be many, many generations before it comes back, if at all. I think the Liberal Party, as we know it, died in 2015, and it's never going to come back as a party of the center to compete with whoever's at the center, should that be the Conservatives or whatnot. That's because I think they have become, it's become fairly clear that, in losing and knowing that every single poll, not just one, but every poll is showing that they're going to be defeated soundly, that they've become rather spiteful. The Liberals are very spiteful. They're angry because they know the grift is coming to an end. They know their control over the media by buying the CBCs and buying the other mainstream media, $600–700 million of our money. Same thing with academics, same thing with opinion leaders. Look, there's no doubt that they have those people out there. I see them all the time. I fight with them from time to time, and I will eliminate some of them from time to time. But before doing that, make them look very foolish, because I've been around this business a lot longer than they have. And I can tell you this. Anybody who does not believe that Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh are going to be deep sixed in the next election, that is, they are going to lose badly, is kidding themselves. It's probably delusional, because they're going to be ending their jobs or their grift. When your own team is starting to go, when people of my generation, not just me, but guys like Eddie Goldenberg, Principal Secretary to Jean Chrétien, Percy Down, previous Principal Secretary to Jean Chrétien, are all saying, bye, it's time to go. And they don't want to listen to that. These people are living in a very mythical world. I'm just shocked that there's 22% of people who are thick in the head right now and who think that that's the way we should continue. If that's what you believe, and that somehow, oh, Trump's elected, therefore we can cash in on that over the next year politically, you're kidding yourself, because I think Canadians have reached that point. We've crossed the Rubicon. We didn't just cross the Rubicon. We damn well built a huge bridge over it. Canadians are fed up with this government. They're fed up with the coalition, and they're going to send a very strong message, pollsters or no pollsters, in the next election. And there isn't a single Canadian out there of reasonable mind, of rational mind, of sound mind who would disagree with that.
Dan, certainly lots to talk about in the weeks and the months to come. Can't wait for it. That's why I always look forward to connecting with you each and every week right here on Fuel for Thought. Dan, but when you're not here hanging out and chatting with me about all things energy related and beyond, where can folks find you?
Yeah, president at affordableenergy.ca, or just go to affordableenergy.ca. Some of the articles we've done long before these things get published. We tend to be a little ahead of the curve on this stuff. The second factor is Gas Price Wizard. I'm there. Twitter tends to be where I do a lot of my exchanges with people and bring up new ideas. Not very long, I get 200 characters. I don't go much longer than that, but those are the two best ways in which to get a hold of me.
Dan, pleasure as always. Enjoy the rest of your time, and all the best to you, as I know that you'll be recognizing and celebrating on Remembrance Day, which is
Absolutely.
Monday, November 11th. Be well, and we'll talk again next week.
Take care, Scott. Have a great week.
You as well. Thank you.